Hola. And my Spanish is not very good, so I'll stick to English. So I'm Charles Breck. Thank you for coming to listen to my presentation. And what we do is we make contracts machine readable. So the presentation will kind of go into what does that actually mean, how are we doing it, and where do we see the future of contracts. So, Legislate is a team. We're a team of 12, and we're based, HQ is in Oxford, and we have a team in Seville. That's the whole team in Seville a couple of weeks ago. And really what we're trying to do is, initially via a web app, allow anyone to create the contracts that they need for their business without needing to get lawyers involved at every step. And behind the scenes, we're leveraging a knowledge graph to help with tailoring the contracts, providing some protection to our users, but also making the contract hyper-searchable. And I'm also aware that there are a lot of knowledge graph experts in this room, so I'm not the knowledge engineer, I'm just the CEO, so please don't ask too many difficult questions. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the data in the contracts usable so that you can create your contracts, but then you can feed that data into your business and make better decisions. So in terms of the problem we're solving, I think it's pretty obvious, or most people in this room have probably created a contract before that. It was expensive, slow, and quite a painful experience overall. And post-signature, which is where 90% of the work involved in contracts happens, you really struggle to answer any basic questions about your contract. No matter how well you know your contract, you probably don't know exactly when it ends. You probably don't know when the, certain clauses are kicking in or where certain options are. And then when you have multiple contracts, it's a nightmare. And why? Well, the key reason is because contracts are lawyer readable, meaning, unless you're a lawyer and you know how to, understand legalese or understand what certain terms mean or why they need to be in that contract, contracts are confusing. And the majority of people are not lawyers. The other thing about contracts, and also why we generally need lawyers, is because there's lots of rules in terms of what can or can't be combined together, and also how you combine. You can't, for example, at least in UK employment law, you can't impose unreasonable restrictions to employees if you're only putting them on a 2-day or 1-week notice period, for example. So these are all rules which lawyers kind of apply whenever they look at the contract. And then finally, lawyers love Word and PDF, because they can comment, they can track the changes, etc., which is great for lawyers. But that's not ideal if you want to do any form of automation or digital processing. So what is the solution? Machine-readable contracts. And what is a machine-readable contract apart from a contract that can be read by machines and therefore streamlined? It's a set of parameters and variables that can help structure the contract. And obviously the more variables and parameters you add, the more flexible you can go and the more granular you can go. There's logic, so rules in terms of how can these parameters be combined. And then connections, because there are different classes of contracts. There are elements which are the same and shared. And so we leverage ontologies, both within the contracts and also the entities, so that you can really extract a lot more intelligence than if you were just treating everything as independent entities. So we've done that by using knowledge graphs. So again, I'm aware that there are some knowledge graph experts in this room, but for those who aren't knowledge graph experts, a knowledge graph is simply a way of modeling data as relations as opposed to with tables. And entities are stored as triples of a subject, predicate, and object. And in this specific example, we have an NDA between John Smith and ABC Limited. And again, I've just taken a very basic representation of what that NDA is. You can go much more granular as well. But if we were to, if I was to ask, does John have a contract with ABC? Everyone in this room is looking at me thinking, why am I asking such a stupid question or an obvious question? The answer is yes, just by looking at that. But for a machine, it's not obvious because we haven't explicitly defined what a contract is, explicitly in the data, or even there is no obvious relation or direct relation between John and ABC. And that's where the relational databases or NoSQL databases tend to fall, is because unless you've explicitly provided that data, you can't answer those queries, no matter how simple they are, unless you kind of code some logic in your code or whatever. And with knowledge graphs, you can use something called semantic reasoning, where you can define these rules and relationships so that you can infer that missing data. So you can see between the lines of your data. So we could, for example, have a very simple rule which just says that the parties of a contract have a contract with each other. And as long as we've defined what a party is, then we can see this new edge appear between John Smith and ABC, saying that John has a contract with ABC and vice versa. And so we can answer those questions very easily. And we use rules, to infer missing data or data which isn't explicit. We also use it to derive concepts. So, for example, is this contract important? What does important mean? Every user will have their own interpretation, so we allow them to, or at least we want to allow them to, provide their own concepts. And initially today, what we're doing with our rules is we're just preventing undesirable configurations, so that our users who are not lawyers, when they create contracts, they don't end up putting themselves in a situation where the contract is not enforceable because they put in some parameters which don't make sense. So that was, just a very quick overview of knowledge graphs and how you can kind of apply reasoning in the context of contracts. But the obvious, benefit of using a knowledge graph or using any machine-readable approach to contracts is you can query your contracts. And because contracts by nature have very tangled data, where there's a lot of, relationships or sub-relationships within the parameters and between contracts, thanks to our knowledge graph, we can answer very granular questions like, how many of my software developers have been with me for 3 years, so on a 30-day notice period, and why would I want to ask that question? Well, in practice, if you have someone who's been with you for that long, maybe you want to put them on a longer notice period because they're much more valuable to your business than, in their first 6 months with you, working with you. So we really offer that flexibility to ask questions to your contracts. And now I'm going to show a very quick demo, video, por favor, which will kind of just give you an overview of the platform today from the perspective of a business user, for example, a CEO of a company. They'll have employment contracts, NDAs, and various other agreements, and we'll just kind of present how, in our case, we've implemented faceted search, which is a way of producing e-commerce type filters to navigate your data, but where the filters are all generated dynamically based on what's actually in your database, so that you only ever are presented options which make sense. So do I need to click? Perfect, great. So this is the Legislate dashboard. We have various metrics. Is it me or is... Do I need to play? Or... sorry. So we present general metrics at the top about what's in the contracts. I've got various contracts. Obviously, it would be a pain if I had to manually search through them individually. But, and this is where advanced search comes in. We call it advanced search, but it's faceted search for the technical audience. You simply filter the terms that you want to filter by, and all the terms update, and the contracts update as well. And then you can go to your contract, and the NDA is, of course, a very simple agreement. But the idea is that any term, any parameter that is in your contract, you can then use to narrow down your search. So, for example, in employment agreement, there are many more variables. We can find quickly all the contracts that we created last summer. That will update both on the one hand what you can see on the left, so those parameters, but also the contracts on the right. And you could also use this tool to answer questions like, how many of my employees are on X, or how many employees report to a certain line manager. But the purpose of what we've implemented today is just to find the contracts that you're looking for based on very specific criteria. And this also scales with, in this example, I've only got 100 contracts, but you could have, thousands of contracts, and we'd still get that speed thanks to the flexibility of the graph. But where we want to go further is, make the search more of a data exploration, so that you can, navigate your contracts without necessarily, where the end goal isn't to find a contract, which is what we've just seen, but the end goal is more to get insight and make better business decisions. So back to the presentation, please. So thank you. So there's all sorts of things that you can do, by having your machine readable contracts. Aside from the queryability and the unique insights, you can also do things like compliance as a service. So actually a number of our clients are startups, and so whenever they go through due diligence, it's always very easy. But if you were a much larger organization and you cared about gender pay gap reporting, you could offer that service, but also in a much more granular way, where you could also demonstrate that, yes, maybe we're working on pay, but we're also working on the contractual terms like restrictions, because no one actually has access to that data, whereas we do. And so in terms of scaling machine readable contracts, we're building or we're releasing APIs so that contracts can become APIs, so that because one thing that we've noticed is that, businesses, people, they have their own workflows. They might use their own CRM, they might use their own systems. And obviously we have managed to convince some to move over to us, but it'll be so much easier and efficient if we can just embed ourselves into their system. So we've built our API, we're releasing it in the next couple of weeks to beta customers. But what that means, aside from allowing users to create contracts in their systems, is it means that we can also start to offer new services either by removing friction, because typically contracts are unstructured PDFs or paper documents, and there's always someone who's moving that contract around, so we remove friction there. But we can also start to offer services based on the fact that we have that data. So things like if you're in property and you're a tenant and you're paying rent, we can do things like payment verification, not just has the amount been paid, but does it match what's in the contract? And this, video numero dos, por favor. So I'm just going to show a very quick demo of the API documentation. Everyone can go to developers.legislate.tech and play around with it. And it's just an interactive API documentation. It's a RESTful API. Anyone can get started and start creating contracts, but you can already start creating contracts from the documentation itself. So you don't need to necessarily download anything or set anything up. So everything's defined, everything that you need to create a contract, and then you just click try it, and it will actually give you the responses that you need to then start building your workflows. We are looking for beta testers. So if anyone wants to play with the API, just let me know, and we'll give you some keys. Right. So what does that mean? I touched on it briefly for contract workflows. Well, we can enable new services. When you hire an employee, we can then set up pensions, payroll, or whatever other benefits which are connected to the contract. And pretty much anything that touches a contract, we want to, facilitate from Legislate. So we're calling this whole new space Open Contracts, and powered by machine-readable knowledge graphs. But yeah, it's a new space, new market. We're still very early stage, but we do hope that we'll be in Spain one day and the rest of the world as well. So thank you for your time, and let me know if you have any questions.
Fantastic work, by the way. Really, this looks wonderful. I'm curious, are there provisions for, say, a larger firm that has quite a number of vendors they're managing and contracts for each of them, but they would like to have more visibility into that whole workflow? Do you have ways of taking that kind of legacy existing body of contracts and then converting them into Legislate?
Yeah. So right now, we've gone for the easiest route to market. So we provide the templates, and the customers that we tend to work with, there are small businesses that don't have a legal counsel, and so they'll just take what we have. We do work with businesses that have their own legal counsels, and they'll just simply waive our responsibility for what's in their contracts. But we have a back office where legal teams can upload contracts to Legislate. So we definitely want to go after those organizations where they have hundreds of suppliers, hundreds of vendors, and I think especially for procurement teams, there's a lot of value in just knowing what's actually in the pipeline. And that's actually why I started Legislate, is because contracts that were clearing procurement were not getting signed because it had taken too long and buyers were promoted into different departments or lost the budget. So yeah, we're starting small, but we're going big, and I do hope we can get there.
Fantastic. One other quick question. I don't know if it's possible to talk about, but do you have guidance for how large or what range of sizes of graphs are coming out of a typical contract?
The graphs are pretty small right now, just because we're trying to keep things simple. And where the graph gets a bit bigger is more the aggregate graph of all the graphs. And some of our clients are creating 100 contracts a month, so that is growing over time. And those metrics that we saw on the dashboard, they're all computed using reasoning, so it's all pre-query time. So it gives a lot of insight that they just don't have today. But we're also in the process of, now that we've got the API, we'll also be able to, really upload 2,000 or 5,000 or even 1 million contracts and see what happens. So that's I'm quite excited about that.
Fantastic.
So when you were showing us the video, there were a lot of facets in the search experience. Are those facets hard-coded by you guys, or was that extracted from the knowledge graph?
So that's all extracted from the knowledge graph. And maybe I was going a bit quickly, but they all update each time you click on something. So that we only propose facets which actually exist, because as you maybe know from e-commerce, sometimes you click on something and think, oh, I've got my perfect shoe, right size, right color, but it doesn't exist because they've hard-coded, whereas this is all dynamic.
So in 10 years' time, when Legislate is, huge and everyone's using this, what does the legal profession look like, and what do you think lawyers will be doing interacting with this?
Yeah, so we're not trying to replace lawyers. We're really trying, and I think the other thing about lawyers is they don't actually like reviewing contracts or drafting contracts or amending contracts. They'd much rather advise you on which contracts should you use based on your situation, or if you're in an existing contract based on what's happened, what can you actually do? And I think that those are kind of like the high value tasks that lawyers like doing and should do. And if we can streamline contract templates, then they really should just be either providing their rules to the system, or just interpreting the overall metrics as opposed to creating contracts.
Are those things that eventually Legislate could learn to do as well?
I think yes, but I think it's one step at a time. And I also feel like there's just already so much value. Two key contracts are employment contracts and tenancy agreements. They're very basic contracts where actually you wouldn't necessarily use a lawyer at all. But even things like invoices, a lot of invoices are generated with payment terms which contradict what's in the contract. Why? Because it's different teams, and neither the invoices or the contracts are machine readable. So I feel like there's a lot of systems that are built to solve a specific problem, which has a contract in the workflow, but they've never really started from the contract. Whereas what we're doing is we're starting from the contract, we're getting contracts right, and then once we've done that, we're going to start expanding into the different verticals or workflows, so that ultimately we can offer that more complete experience, but also more consistent, because we've got the source of truth from day one, as opposed to afterwards.
Maybe I have the last question. So the way you're building this, like the contract, like the piece of text you see is just a view of the actual contract. The contract is the graph and the information behind it. So the text creates a friction for machines, and but the graphs create a friction for humans. So how are people reacting to the change of mindset of starting from data structure instead of starting from a piece of text which doesn't create friction to them? How is the human reaction to it?
I mean, so far there's been quite a lot of positive feedback, both from the people creating the contracts and the people on the other end. I think one thing that we also tend to forget with contracts is the formatting is always, rubbish, and our formatting is rubbish. We're going to work on that. But the point is, it's generally not a great experience. And one reason why e-signature platforms have done so well is because it makes it easy to sign, but it doesn't make it easy to read. So people are signing contracts without really knowing what they're signing. So really what we're trying to do is offer different views of the contract, because we interpret information in different ways. We also want to offer like videos to explain what the contract is about. We do have toggles to enable inline explanations, but I think just presenting the parameters of the contract and their possible values and what they mean to users is already a great way to access information about your contract or understand what your contract is about, as opposed to having to navigate through text and trying to find things. So I think our target market is right now the non-lawyers. And that's been a great exercise for us to really simplify both the language of the contracts, but also how the app works. And I think that if we can get that consumer usability, but also consumer understandability of contracts, then we can take this anywhere, and it'll be hopefully successful.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Charles, for the brilliant presentation.